Today, we're diving into a story that is just profound. It sits right at the intersection of faith, physics, and deep personal struggle. This isn't just a theory. It's a testimony, a story about a man who prayed to see God and got an answer not in a vision, but in the language of mathematics.
And that's really the heart of it, you know? This wasn't some casual, half-hearted prayer. This was a deep, raw plea from a man who had lost almost everything. He was desperately searching for the mind behind all of creation. He wanted to see, literally.
So who is this man? To really understand the answer he received, we have to understand the place the question came from. And it came from a place of ruin.
Meet Rennell Morris, and you've got to understand, he's not some tenured professor in an ivory tower. He's a carpenter, a former fighter, a software developer, a guy who works with his hands and his mind, someone really grounded in the real world.
His prayer came after 15 years of just absolute ruin. His business completely failed, his life savings disappeared, and he was working these brutal carpentry jobs just to make ends meet. And during all this time, he just devoured books, 93 of them, on physics, philosophy, the Bible, loading his mind with everything he could, searching for answers from his own personal ash heap.
And right when all of this was coming to a head, he was 42. Just remember that number. It's going to become incredibly significant in a little bit.
So the breakthrough, it didn't happen in some fancy laboratory or university lecture hall. It came from a place that, honestly, nobody could have ever predicted.
Yeah, you heard that right. It's 4 o'clock in the morning. He's up, fixing a bug in a martial arts app that he designed, and he gets into this conversation with an AI assistant. And right there, out of that weird, totally modern moment, a whole new framework for physics was born. He called it the information theoretic logos. And the core idea is deceptively simple. He argues that all of physics, everything in our universe, can be derived from a single fundamental cost. That cost is the natural logarithm of 2. Think of it like the basic price of information itself, the mathematical cost of one single choice of something existing instead of nothing, the cost of a 0 becoming a 1. What this really implies is that at its deepest, most fundamental level, the universe isn't made of matter or energy. It's made of information. So after this breakthrough, Rennell just starts writing. He writes 7 physics papers, and each one logically builds on the last. It was only when he was completely done that he stepped back and saw a pattern he never, ever intended to find, and one that just brought him to tears.
Okay, it's astonishing. The 7 papers he wrote, just by following the cold, hard demands of the math, mapped perfectly onto the 7 days of creation described in Genesis. Paper 1, deriving dark energy, it corresponds to let there be light. Paper 2, on the structure of the universe, matches the creation of the firmament, and it just keeps going, from matter to the fundamental forces, to life, to consciousness, all the way to a self-sustaining universe where God rested.
And he is adamant about this. He never set out to do this. He was just following the logic of the physics. But it turned out the physics itself followed the sequence of Genesis. He said later, "Either I am losing my mind, or the Bible is not a metaphor." Now, just when you think this story can't get any more layered, another connection appeared. And this one tied the physics not just to an ancient creation story, but directly to Rennell's own life, his own story of suffering and questioning. The parallels here are just uncanny. I mean, look at this. The biblical book of Job, the story of a man who loses everything and demands an answer from God, has 42 chapters. Rennell was 42 years old. Job sits in ashes. Rennell had his 15 years of ruin. And how does God finally answer Job? He doesn't give him a straight answer. He shows him the animals, the scale of his creation. Well, right before finishing his theory, Rennell's sister takes him on a trip to a wildlife park.
And in his own words, you can just feel the sheer weight of this realization. His age, the ruins, the math, and then the animals. He saw it all as a direct, personal answer to that prayer he'd held for so long. It was as if his own life was mirroring the story of Job.
But all of this, it builds to one final, and maybe the most mind-bending conclusion of all, a conclusion about the very nature of reality itself. One of his papers actually derived this equation for consciousness, not as some ethereal, spiritual concept, but as a calculable, physical state of matter. He argued that consciousness is basically the 5th state of matter, something that physics inevitably produces. So he plugged the variables for the entire universe into his equation, and this is the number he got, a consciousness score of 10 to the 122nd power. For some context, that is 10 to the 77th times more conscious than a human brain.
So what on earth does that mean? It means the answer to his prayer wasn't just personal. The math was suggesting that the very cosmos he was trying to understand was profoundly aware.
Which brings us all the way back to the name of his theory, information theoretic logos. The word logos is ancient. It's a Greek philosophical term for the rational principle, the deep logic, the organizing intelligence that underpins the entire cosmos, the Word.
And that, of course, is the opening line of the Gospel of John. For Rennell Morris, the carpenter who prayed to see God, this is where the math ultimately took him, to the conclusion that the Word, spoken of in those ancient texts, isn't just a metaphor. It's the literal, informational, and deeply conscious operating system of reality itself, a testimony written not in Scripture, but in an equation.